All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, I'm Pearl Junior, and I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. Webinar is brought to you as a membership benefit of Heritage Ohio. Heritage Ohio's mission is to help people to save the places that matter, build community, and live better. Today we'll be having a presentation on Franklinton with Jim Sweeney. We'll be taking questions throughout the presentation and we'll be answering them at the end. If you have a question, please type it into the question box at any time and we will get to it if we don't answer it already. Most issues with the webinar software will be solved if you close the program and restart it with the link that was sent to you. Our presenter is Jim Sweeney. Jim Sweeney earned a bachelor's degree in television production from Ohio University and a master's degree in city regional planning from the Ohio State University. Before joining Franklinton Development Association as an executive director in 2002, Jim worked as a land use planner and zoning staff at the Ohio Regional Planning Commission, where he created land use plans for small cities and townships and the Franklin Country Greenways Plan. 12 years as executive director of the FDA, Jim has led efforts to revitalize Franklinton through several real estate projects and community initiatives designed to reshape the built landscape, especially around quality and affordable housing, but also the perceived landscape of the community. In a community that did not see the creation of a single new house in over 80 years, the FDA has created or helped create over 150 new or rehabilitated affordable housing units, most of which are strategically located to support revitalization. Under Jim, the FDA started several neighborhood initiatives and was the primary catalyst for the East Franklinton Creative District Plan and its ongoing implementation. Under Jim's leadership, the FDA was named 2009 Ohio CDC of the Year by the Ohio CDC Association. Jim is a spokesperson and advocate for equitable and sustainable inward city growth, repeatedly recognized as one of the top 10 community leaders by the media, and has been profiled and one of the local newspapers and magazines, including Columbus Monthly. And with that, I will hand this over to Jim.
Wow, thanks, Pearl. Thank you, and sorry for the long introduction. I should cut some of that out. I'm sure your listeners will hear me talk about a lot of that stuff. Excuse me, bear with me, everyone. This is my first time on this side of the microphone for a webcast. I am Jim Sweeney. I'm the director of the Franklinton Development Association. Franklinton Development Association was founded in 1993. It's an association of several groups that got together back then and said it's time to revitalize this neighborhood. It's time to put in place an organization that can take advantage of the tools that the federal, state, and local governments had put in place. Notably, in our case, the federal home program, which basically bridges the gap between costs to develop houses and what those houses are worth. So the Franklinton Area Commission, Glidden Community House, Mount Carmel Hospital, Medicare Access are all institutions in Franklinton came together and formed the Franklinton Development Association. That's why it's called the association. It's important to Franklinton Development Association that we have a strong legitimacy in our neighborhood. We have in our bylaws a requirement that we have 51% of our board are either residents or some other kind of stakeholder in Franklinton. They can be business owners, they can be executives of nonprofits that serve the community. They can be low-mod income households themselves, but it's very, very important to us that we have legitimacy on behalf of this community. And so we're proud to maintain that number. Our mission, which we just are in the process of updating right now, but it'll stay pretty much the same, and that is to stabilize and positively impact Franklinton neighborhood through housing, economic, and community development. Of course, historic preservation is a major part of that, given the history, the important history in the neighborhood. Real quickly, a couple more things about me. I was born in New York. Family moved here with the Borden Company. I don't know if anybody out there remembers when the Bordens moved to Columbus. TV production degree from OU and master's in city planning from Ohio State. I am also a proud Franklinton resident. Recently bought a house, and my next slide is a picture of that house with my lovely girlfriend in front. I thought some of you might enjoy seeing the challenge. It's a pretty good example of a Franklinton house. We see a lot of these in our work. I'm also very happy to be assisted today by one of my dearest friends and longtime board member, Bruce Warner. Bruce has lived in Franklinton for 58 years, and in a way is the conscience and the soul of our organization. He didn't know I was going to say all that, but whatever. He's also happens to be the leading historian about Franklinton, so I want to touch a lot on history. I think there's a lot of interest in that, and so I asked Bruce to join me today. I'm pretty certain today is Bruce's first webinar. Is that correct, Bruce?
It sure is. I didn't even know what the word was.
Me neither. Well, no, I didn't know. Just not this side of it. And what street do you live on, Bruce?
I live on Hayden Avenue.
Okay.
And I lived there in the same home for 54 years.
Excellent. And Bruce you're a long-time railroad guy, right?
Yeah, I spent 37 years in the railroad, hired out as a telegraph operator, would you believe? And then became a supervisor. For many years, I was supervisor for the last 30 years or so, but I hired out as a telegraph operator.
So I'm very happy to have Bruce here joining us today, helping me today. Unfortunately, I don't think I had any pictures of you in this thing.
That's good.
I didn't think about calling you until fairly the last minute as I crammed in a lot of history stuff, and I appreciate you joining me at short notice. Let me give you a little background for those of you who may not be that familiar with Franklinton or Columbus. Franklinton sits on the near west side of Columbus, just off downtown. You'll see it here. It's kind of a thumb sticking in the side of the downtown. The neighborhood is just on the other side of the river. It's been somewhat disconnected geographically by the river and by railroad tracks. Bridges have been out over the years. It's been one of our issues that it's discouraged people from visiting and certainly investing over the years. This Franklinton was founded by Lucas Sullivan. I am very happy to have Bruce here to talk a little bit about Lucas Sullivan and why he landed here and what he did when he got here.
Lucas Sullivan came here as a surveyor for the Virginia Military District to survey land to pay the Revolutionary soldiers from the state of Virginia. And he saw the forks of the river, and he thought this was a good place to build a town. And of course, he was paid in land, and he also bought land. What you see here is a hand-drawn replica of his original map, which is pretty hard. It still exists, his original map, but it's almost unreadable. As you see, Main Street down there was Franklin Street, and this is what he called Franklin Street. And North-South Street was Washington Street. And all the street names have been changed except three. That's Mill Street, Gift Street, and Green Street. All the other names were changed over the years. Franklinton was one of the later annexes to Columbus, although it was where the whole thing started. When Franklinton never had its own government, it never was a city, it was never a township, it was never a village, but it was the county seat of Franklin County. When Ohio was formed in 1803, they made counties, and Franklinton was picked as the county seat for Franklin County, and it went from Ross County to Lake Erie, about a fourth of the state, so it was huge. And but it really came under its own in 1812 when it became the headquarters for William Henry Harrison, who was the general who led the army in the West, the American army in the West to fight the British in 1812. And it grew a whole lot then, and that's when it became fairly well known. And of course, the same year that, matter of fact, the same date that the United States declared war on Britain, Columbus was formed on that same day.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Let me advance here and just show everybody where this is a current aerial of Franklinton. So you'll be able to see where his original plat set up. You can, if you look at where the river's confluence and see that on the aerial, it's interesting because it shows how the neighborhood's changed over the years with the railroad tracks coming in, the freeways coming in, and all of that.
And when he first formed the city and first laid it out, he laid it a little further, closer to the river, a little further east, and of course it immediately flooded. So he picked up and moved it a little west, a little further. He built his home at the corner of Sandusky Street and Broad Street, well, Sandusky and it became Sandusky and Broad, and then of course Sandusky, and it's Broad and 315 now. And that's where he built his home. And of course, he, being a surveyor, was sort of a little smarter than the average duck, and that was the highest ground in Franklinton. So when it flooded, his house didn't get wet, which was a smooth thing.
That's nice for him.
And this is a picture of some of the floods in Franklinton. This is a 1913 flood. There were numerous floods in Franklinton. They thought the worst one they ever saw was in 1897, and they thought it couldn't get any worse than that till this 1913 flood came along, and it just destroyed Franklinton for the most part. Wherever there was any current, this is what happened to the houses. If the water just came up, why, it wasn't so bad, but when there was any current, this is what happened. These are some of the rescues along rescue boats. The Dispatch made a big name for itself when it brought boats in from Mr. Wolf at the Dispatch, brought boats in from Buckeye Lake to rescue folks. And this is a scene of some of the boats he brought in. This is a 1959 flood. There was no life lost in the 59 flood. It was pretty much the water went up and went down. This is one of the Army ducks that they used to rescue folks. The water wasn't near as deep. In 13 flood, the water in some places was well over 18 foot deep. In this era, the deepest water was around Princeton. Well, the lowest place in Franklinton is Princeton and Sullivan Avenues.
How deep did it get in the deepest part during the worst flood?
18 feet at least.
So 18 feet. So many of the houses in Franklinton, as a result, have been underwater because they were around at that time.
I would say that any houses that survived the 13 flood and are still here now, probably 90% of them were in the flood. Mm-hmm. Very few survived the flood because there's not that much high ground. And but the houses survived more than they do today. The new homes today are built with material like drywall, and it just goes to pot in the water.
Yeah. And
these were plaster, and so it made a big difference.
So as we're going to get into here in a little bit, FDA, one of the things we do, one of the main things we do is buy and rehab houses. So we'll get into the basement sometimes and see the water line. Sometimes it's higher than the basement. Sometimes it's very high in the house. So it's just another challenge to add to revitalizing the existing housing. Added this because I thought people would find it interesting. This is, of course, Veterans Memorial Site. What's going on in this picture?
This is a site. This is a picture, probably about 1948. I'm thinking, prior to vets. This is Broad Street. The road you see in the front is Broad Street. And north of Broad, there was two streets, and you can see all the factories and what have yous in there. You see a little small white building on the left-hand side. That's a White Castle.
Really?
That's a White Castle. Bell and Broad.
Cool.
And I don't remember it. My wife used to frequent it quite frequently because she went to Central, mm-hmm. and I didn't. But and you notice the bridges in the distance.
Yeah.
You see the three bridges, which are overhead girder bridges, the three spans. That's the original river. There's two spans. The lower spans on the left-hand side is how much the river was widened after the 13 flood.
Okay.
And it can be seen from Broad Street. Now, of course, the river's gray now, and it'll revert back to that original three bridges probably.
Yeah, they're finding real interesting things under the water in our river downtown. Old building foundations.
Oh yeah, it's really great. And then you see the old where they build the foundations. You can see where they put. They call them dams to build so they can, pump them out and build the foundation. Copper dams. You can see the old remnants of wooden copper dams when they let the water down. It was really interesting.
Nice. And this is, of course, the old T&O station, a pagoda design.
Yeah, this was one of the famous architects in Columbus, mm-hmm. who designed in many places, Chittenden Hotel, many buildings on the OSU campus. And he designed this building. This is at street level before they elevated the tracks.
Yeah.
So this picture is probably about 1905 or 6. Probably the best picture of the depot. It was a Toledo and Ohio Central depot, and it was the only real depot in Columbus other than the Union Station, which was on North High Street. So this served as a depot from 1890 1898 until 1930 or 31. So when they last used the depot.
At some point, they elevated the tracks in the foreground there, and then there's another set of tracks about 20 or 30 feet beyond that, no, more like 100 feet actually,
Yeah.
beyond that, and they were both elevated so you could drive underneath them, and it served to block that building. You can't really even see that traveling eastbound into downtown from Franklin.
That's correct.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah, those were erected in between 1909 and 1911 to alleviate the traffic problems. Now, in 1910, this building burnt. The whole roof burned off the building, and the fire department, Hill Station number 6, is about 3 blocks east or to the right of this building. And as the building burnt, the fire trucks showed up there, and there's the tracks of this was the TNLC tracks, and the Hocking Valley tracks, as I can say, about 50 yards, 60 yards or something east of there, and they were across the tracks, and the fire department stood there and watched the building burn off, watched this roof burn off in 1910. And it burned again in 1975, but the building was restored, and it's still in existence. The only thing missed was the tile roof. The tile on the tower is still there, but the tile on the main part of the building is gone, in essence, but it's in the basement. So if everyone wants to pay to have that tile put back on, it's still there.
Sounds like a fun project. The irony of that is now it's the firefighter union hall.
Yes, it is.
So the firefighters call that
Yes,
home.
it is.
One last historic slide. What is this thing?
This is Fort Franklinton. When they were working on the
That's a fort?
that was the log part, and what we don't know a whole lot about this was when they found this building. It was on Sandusky Street, or now what you would call 315. This is when they were working on the elevating the tracks, and they found it, and they were going to take this building out. When they tore the clapboard off the siding, they found this log house inside, and it was pockmarked with arrowheads. Arrowheads were buried in this building. And this is a Columbus Dispatch photo about 1908, 1909 in the era, and the building was disassembled and taken to someplace as a cabin at Buckeye Lake, and it's still over there someplace, we think, but we don't know exactly where.
Where was it before exactly?
It was on Sandusky Street,
Oh,
north
right.
of Broad Street, or on what you mean 315, north of Broad, and it was quite a thing in the paper. That's about all we know about it.
Franklinton has a Revolutionary War cemetery?
This is the first cemetery in Columbus, and it's the only, to my knowledge, it's the only cemetery in the Corporation of Columbus.
So
All the rest of the cemeteries belong to townships.
And so the historic, so the Revolutionary War one is the one on the top, the yellow arrow on the top.
Yeah.
You can see the headstones there with that say that. And then, of course, the bottom arrow is the Green Lawn Cemetery, which is...
Yeah. A lot of the graves have been moved to Green Lawn. Lucas Sullivan and his family are all buried originally, and they're all moved to Green Lawn. But there's still a lot of graves here, somewhere in Mark. The first church was in this cemetery.
Huh.
And it was during the War of 1812. They commandeered the church and put grain in there, and the roof leaked, the grain swelled and blew and it just literally expanded out, and it just blew the walls out of the building of the church.
So I encourage anybody to take a look at both these cemeteries. They're very interesting for different reasons. Obviously, the one on the north side of the neighborhood it's got these amazing historical markers, and the one on the south side of the neighborhood has Green Lawn Cemetery has that also. It's also just a really interesting place with really unique markers and just a unique environment. You can get kind of lost back there. It's pretty cool. So I wanted to take a minute and break down sort of our perspective on Franklinton. As we said earlier, my training is in city planning. When we look at neighborhoods, or in planning, when you look at land uses, you tend to try to break things down into sort of understandable bites. People generally perceive we try to understand generally how people are going to perceive the environment, and then work on that, be able to somehow predict their movements or even encourage their movements and their investments. And one interesting thing I always thought about Franklinton is, like many urban neighborhoods, it is split a bunch of times. So it's split by the river, certainly, and then it's split by railroad tracks and freeways. And I think that really does affect the way people feel about the place, because when people cross these urban edges or even witness these urban edges, they tend to, I think, have a different perception of the place, and they're less likely to do things. So I think if you take a thoughtful approach at bringing people across these edges, then you'll be more successful. So we kind of look at Franklinton as different planning areas that are divided by the man-made and natural edges. Of course, there's the peninsula down closest to downtown, which is in a way been absorbed into downtown, if you will, because it's now part of the downtown development district. That deal was made years ago when the powers that be in the city wanted to put COSI and do some other investment over there. So that's actually not really even part of like the Franklinton Area Commission or the Franklinton Development Association jurisdiction, if you will. It's on our side of the river, so it's still Franklinton in pretty much everybody's perception. But that's kind of from a development perspective in the ballpark of the downtown CDCs. Then we get to East Franklinton, which is just on the other side of the elevated railroad tracks. Again, back to edges. I mean, not only do we have railroad tracks there, we've got a double set of railroad tracks that are also elevated. So there's underpasses that are required. There used to be a lot of homeless people. There still are a lot of homeless people that live or you know, kind of live in the neighborhood because we have a lot of railroad tracks, and homeless people tend to make their lives on the tracks all over. And so, but there was also a homeless shelter that existed on State Street, right in the middle of the neighborhood. It's gone now, but back in the day, there was plenty, and that shelter was only open in the daytime. I'm sorry, the shelter was only open at nighttime, so that people would just hang out all day in the daytime and then wait for it to open up at night. And so it put a lot of homeless people on the street in East Franklinton. There's a soup kitchen on the west side of the neighborhood, and the homeless shelter was on the other side, so there's basically just a lot of hanging out, and that, you know, kind of ran the property values down in that area also. But most people in the neighborhood live in the part we call West Franklinton. That is everything west of 315. 315 was built in like 1968, I think it was, Bruce.
Yeah, about that time.
Replaced Sandusky Street and did what it did to all the urban neighborhoods that freeways go through, and that is kind of split them in character. People don't like to walk over or under freeways to get where they're going, so they generally kind of splits neighborhoods. And one of our approaches at FDA is to recognize that and work with it. We don't want our neighborhood to be split. We want to repair it, but we also have to understand that the one side is going to react differently than the other side, especially with East Franklinton being so much closer to downtown than West Franklinton. You have to do it one at a time. You have to do one the way it wants to be done and do the other like it wants to be done. Well, we do both. We do East Franklinton in one way and West Franklinton in another way, and we're hoping that the energy in East Franklinton can help out with West Franklinton because of the numbers you see there. At its peak, West Franklinton had about 30,000 people living there. Now there are less than 9,000. So we have a lot of vacant lots, a lot of vacant houses, lots of room to grow, improve, and build new. Income is extremely low, probably one of the lowest, poorest neighborhoods in the state. Median household income is less than $17,000 a year. High school graduation is very low, 28, 30%. Home ownership rate is also low, although not that out of whack really with the other downtown neighborhoods. Some of them are affluent, like German Village and some parts of Victorian Village. A third of, you know, it's generally a third to a quarter. Home ownership is actually not that bad, but we're still trying to boost that up, especially as we build new houses and fill in vacant lots and vacant houses. The vacancy rate is 25%. I'm guessing that's a low number. I think it's actually higher than that.
There's the one thing I'd point out. There's many doubles, as a lot of people call them duplexes, but doubles, either side by side, and there's a Franklin has them every place, and for years those doubles like that were a homeowner lived on one side and rented the other side, maybe with his family or somebody else, and it was so the home were better maintained because the owner lived there, but as they moved away and they were bought up by speculators, and this is what happened.
Yeah, so the housing stock in Franklinton is old. It was, the neighborhood, as we said, was developed years ago. The houses themselves are generally small, although this is actually a pretty large house right here.
Large house there,
That's more probably typical of the neighborhood. They're generally small. It's sort of a working class community, mostly frame structures, not a lot of brick. The houses themselves are again small. They're functionally obsolete in that they don't have room to add modern conveniences. There's no room for a dishwasher. There's usually no room for a garage. Most of them don't have garages for cars. So there's significant challenges, and not the smallest of which includes the environmental issues. Houses are painted in lead paint. They have asbestos all over the place. Usually there's some mold, there's radon. There's a lot of issues to solve with these houses. They're historic in nature, but their historic nature does not necessarily increase their value like it would in other neighborhoods.
And most of these homes in Franklin, I don't know what the percentage would be, but I think it'd be well over 80%, were built before sewage was in.
Yeah.
So they had outside toilets. So that the restroom facilities in the homes are usually on the first floor, an add-on place.
Yeah.
Not very many on the second floor. They're very rare unless the house was built after about 1913 or 14. And matter of fact, I've seen many homes with the bathroom in the basement.
Yeah, and the repairs and the additions and things that were done were usually not done very well.
No. They were squirreled in by homeowners.
Yeah.
And amateur builders.
Yeah, so when we go in to repair the bathroom, we generally have to demo the entire thing. We try not to demo the house, although we have done that too. But it's the cost to rehab houses like this, which brings us back to why we're set up a nonprofit in the first place, to use these programs, the home program through the feds. Recently there was a neighborhood stabilization program. The Federal Home Loan Bank has a grant program. There's different tools on the table. None of them are easy to use. They all carry a lot of requirements. Basically, when federal money travels down to the state and to the city, it picks up all sorts of requirements along the way regarding energy efficiency, safety, ADA visitability. So it's a number of challenges, and we're dealing with houses that are upside down to begin with. We can get this house here on the screen maybe for, I mean, this is a pretty severe example. This looks like a burnout, but a lot of houses we get are in not much better shape. We'll pick them up for $15,000 or $20,000, but they'll require about $180,000 worth of work. And knowing that the house is only going to appraise for $80,000 or $85,000 at best, just because of the values in the neighborhood and the lack of comps, means nobody's going to touch these houses, and there's no equity left in them. Even the ones that are owned, people cannot draw nearly enough equity out of the houses to maintain them because they don't have any value. So we began plugging away at actually doing those deals, getting that grant money into these places and trying to boost the values. And we've done it on a block-by-block approach. We started on Martin Avenue. And, well, we started in a few different places. Like I said, we understand the neighborhood is split, so we grabbed two sections, Martin Avenue and West Park Avenue. And they're split by another elevated railroad track. So here we are standing in front of, that's Bruce. So you see Mayor Coleman, the two ladies, Dan Mormon, who's our board president. That's Bruce next to him. And I'm the dashing fellow next to the speaker on the second from the right. And this is a very old photo. I think this was, I know this was the first new house built in Franklinton in about 80 years. I can't remember the date which we did. It was something like 2006, 2007.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
But we're very proud of this house. This is on Martin Avenue. We selected Martin Avenue because two reasons, really. We thought we could sell houses there because it's on a boulevard street, or it is a boulevard street, and it backs up to the hospital. So there's a safety factor about Martin that you don't necessarily get in the other parts of the neighborhood. You have the institution at your back. And so we have done, I don't know, maybe 10 or 20, 15 houses on Martin. We've encouraged other people to do more. The city did a program called Home Again, where they came in with bond money and just did a few. And now we've seen others fix up houses because the value has gone up to the point where investment is realistic. And so Martin Avenue is kind of a success story. We haven't claimed it yet, but we will soon, I think. We're ready. We've got one more house to do on that street, and then we're going to move on and work on other streets. I mean, we still do plenty of work on other houses. Like Like Pearl said, we've affected or directly done 150 units. Most of those have been through the low-income housing tax credit program, which is more of a scattered site approach for us. We did one senior building, but the scattered site we think is more effective if we can knit them together somewhat closely and keep them within a sort of targeted plan. These are some of the houses that we've done. I think the bottom two are tax credit houses. The one on the left is, I think it's an NSP house, Neighborhood Stabilization Program, and I think that's the interior of that. So clearly we build to a very high standard. I mean, if we're going to be sinking money into doing all those other things, we need to make the houses marketable also. We're trying to reset the bar, and I think we're being successful. Even the worst investors, the slumlords in the neighborhood, are actually looking hard at improving their properties or selling them to somebody who will. I mean, they wouldn't do that before. They would simply rent the houses. You know, two kinds of investors in the world on the housing front. The kind that are there just to suck cash flow out of them and won't do anything, and then there's the kind who invest for the future and like to see the equity building up in the house. Unfortunately, we've only had the first kind, and now we're starting to see the second kind show up.
Yeah, I want to point out, too, that I think that all the homes we do, we want to make sure that home is livable and they don't have to spend a lot of money for many years to come. So they don't have to reinvest in something, new water heater, or new furnace, or new whatever, a new roof. It's all done.
Right. The idea is of a single mom. You know, we sell houses to single moms. People, you know, that use these programs generally or oftentimes sell houses to single moms, small kids. And the idea is that you put them in a position where they can be successful for 15 years, where they don't have to worry about significant costs while their kids grow up. So you put them you try to put them in a place where their roof will last, the furnace will last, the electric will last, and you know there's going to be expenses in maintaining a house. We just try to do it in such a way that it won't happen to them until the kids are big enough that that they can now afford to be able to deal with their house like everybody does. So let me go back in history a little bit here. When I first came on in 2002. The neighborhood has a pretty bad reputation. It used to be a lot worse. It's known as the Bottoms, and a lot of people don't know the neighborhood by anything but the Bottoms. And it's a kind of a clever nickname because it used to be like more literally low-lying land. It would fill up with water during floods. It was good soil.
Well, right? People moved here, and Sutherland liked it because they had a nasty habit in those days called eating, and you could grow anything. Franklinton's dirt or soil is some of the richest soil around. You can grow anything in Franklinton.
Yeah, but over time, as the neighborhood got poorer and poorer, and the floods drove almost everybody out who could get out, and a lot of social service stuff showed up, or at least people think it did, the homeless shelters, things like that. The values went to hell, and the Bottoms came to mean something else. There was a drug problem, prostitutions, and it became sort of known as the neighborhood in Columbus where you put things that you didn't want to put anywhere else. And being on the opposite side of the river, opposite side of the railroad tracks, it kind of was like the dark corner of your house where you'd never go. You know what I mean? Even though it's just adjacent to downtown, it's a very easy place to avoid. And what we've tried to do is turn that image on its head. We've tried to make it the dark corner of the house that's cooler than the rest of the part of the house, so you want to go there. You know it when you're there. You come over to Franklinton, you know it. You cross, again, to the edges. You cross the river, you go onto the railroad tracks. It's not like any other neighborhood around. It definitely has a feel, and what we try to do is change that feel from being scary and foreign to people to being cool and funky and adventurous to people. And the quickest way we could think to do that was to steal from the short north in Columbus the mantle of the arts neighborhood. They don't tell anybody I said we stole that, but we did. We one day conjured an arts district. We just said, hey, today we're an arts district. We started having arts events in the neighborhood. We started talking about our neighborhood as the home of creativity. We love the short north. It has gone through a fantastic revitalization with art at its core. It's gone that normal path, where to nice galleries, now nice restaurants. But the fact is, a lot of people who used to live there can no longer live there, and they're looking for other places to be. The people who would have lived there 20 years ago are not living there now. We're hoping that we could bring them to Franklinton. Number one, they're not afraid to come over here. Number two, we build affordable housing. So guess what? Guess who fits that model? Young artists. So we thought, good fit. Let's throw some support behind this arts district idea, and it took off. Well, 10 years later, I guess it took off.
Well, this was, I think, the first urban sprawl, I think, as I recall.
Yeah.
And it was great. I thought when there was a lot of people there, for the first time.
Yeah, and we get a lot of press, as you see on the lower left, the Columbus Alive. As a matter of fact, Columbus Alive, for those of you in town here, we're going to be featured on the cover tomorrow. I don't know what they're writing about. There's tons of reporters around. We had the Atlantic Monthly do a story on it. So if you Google Franklinton Atlantic Monthly, you'll pull up 2 different stories where they talked about the using art as a revitalization tool in the neighborhood. So there's a lot of legs under this art thing. Everybody appreciates it. Everybody's turned on by art. Doesn't matter what your background is, education level is, your income level, what part of the world or town you live in. You like art, you can appreciate it. It's very approachable. It's very democratic. Everybody likes it. So we thought, let's bring it over here. This will draw people over to have a positive experience in the neighborhood and begin to change people's perception of the place. We also took a close look at the East Franklinton map and saw that very few people, or entities I should say, own a lot of land in East Franklinton. And this map is several years old. We're going back in history now, about 4 or 5 years. I won't go through the entire thing, but you can see like at the bottom that kind of purple area. That's the Columbus Metropolitan Housing Authority owns all that land. And there was a public housing project down there. And like all the other public housing projects around the country, this one was essentially deconcentrated where the tenants got Section 8 vouchers, were allowed to move wherever they want, and they demoed the site. Now they're going to redevelop it. So they got 13 acres there. And this developer from Los Angeles has 6.5 acres just north of that. Our little nonprofit has a few acres here and there. Then we had the car dealer recently sold their property to Nationwide Insurance, had about 10 acres. So there's a lot of land in very few hands. And our argument at the time, or our idea at the time, was what if we could get everybody who owns a lot of land to work together and develop all together, and so we don't have to worry about the risk. I mean, it's a significant risk to develop in Franklinton because it's been essentially, in a way, abandoned for so long that banks are not going to want to invest down here unless they see us lock arms, unless they see everybody who's invested down here pledging to one another that we're going to work together under a common vision, a common theme. And we took this idea to the mayor, and he said, okay, who all's in? How much acreage do you have under control through this partnership? We told him about 40, 45, something like that acres, and we weren't sure really, but it's evolved into a lot more than that. But Mayor Coleman saw it instantly. He said, so you can make an arts neighborhood out of a neighborhood where nobody wants to go and do it somewhat efficiently if we're all working together. And we said, yeah, that's kind of what we're thinking. And then he took it to a whole other levels. He said, all right, let's do a plan. Let's turn some roads back to 2 ways. Let's put in place a tax increment finance district, a tax abatement area. Let's look at all the tools the city can pour into this. And by the way, I'll throw my name behind it and I'll announce it at my State of the City, and we'll get some real momentum out here. And that's what happened. This is about 5 years ago. Additionally, in that meeting, he said, what else can we do? I said, well, you can buy us a warehouse. We asked the city to give us a grant to buy a 60,000 square foot warehouse, which at the time we had intended to turn into artist live work housing. It's a very cool building. There's a slide of it in here somewhere. This is the plan. East Franklinton community, well, there's a workshop of the plan. I think the plan's the next slide. But the lower left would show you sort of how much interest there is in this. I mean, that's a public meeting. I don't know how many people out there have held public meetings to do planning workshops, but it's really hard to get that many people to turn up, but people are really behind this. Franklinton has a definite underdog sort of story behind it, and people love that. They see people out here dedicated to improving the lives of those people who live here, as well as creating new spaces for those people who want to live here. It's really hard to not find that interesting, in my opinion. They didn't cover the plan, and this plan, by the way, won Best Economic Development Plan at the American Planning Association conference and also at the Urban Land Institute. So this is a good piece of work done by Goody Clancy out of Boston. This is East Franklinton. Now that plan is exclusively about East Franklinton because we all recognize that the neighborhood east of 315 is different than the neighborhood west of 315. Number one, there's very few people living there. Number two, there's a lot of vacant land, as you can see. There's a lot of vacant warehouses. this is clearly a neighborhood that developed before zoning, so there's not really the kind of there's not a mixture of uses like you'd see in other places. This is what the plan recommends, and you can go ahead and Google East Franklinton Creative Community Plan, City of Columbus, if you want to check it out. So the warehouse that the mayor bought for us, this is all going on, by the way, during the growing economic crisis around 2009, 2010, and so basically we chickened out. We bought the warehouse, but we didn't move forward on the artist live work housing because the gap was just too extreme. We did identify a great and I think perfect user for the space, a group called the Columbus Idea Foundry. And they are a maker workshop. They basically, you can buy a membership there and use all the tools they have, and they have lots of really interesting tools. Basically, the basic stuff: wood cutting, metal cutting, welding, all the way up through the advanced technology stuff: laser cutters, 3D printers, 3D scanners. And so there's a real interesting crew of people that hang out there. We thought having that crowd in our neighborhood was a very cool thing. There are businesses spinning off of that. There are educational opportunities. There's a real creative side that would definitely complement the arts approach to the neighborhood. We look at this, bringing the Idea Foundry to the neighborhood, as a major addition, a major anchor in sustainable revitalization to the place. I mean, it's only one tiny step, but a neighborhood like Franklinton is going to require a lot of tiny steps. But this one, I think, is going to cement our momentum. We're going to be able to keep moving forward on this. So some of the photos here, the mayor clearly is a great sport. The ribbon cutting, the groundbreaking, having fun. That's the second floor of the warehouse. I think it demonstrates why we needed to get that building, because it is so cool. The Idea Foundry is going to buy the building from us. So we'll get a nice cash payout that we can translate into expanding our operations, both on the administrative and the development side, do more affordable housing with the money we'll get out of this. And we'll have the Idea Foundry here to drive success in this part of the neighborhood. Just a few photos along the way of doing the Idea Foundry project. This shows different people doing different projects at the Idea Foundry. I stole that slide, and this one too. This is an example of the kind of companies working out of there. This couple has started a business where they make these little hand toys for kids, for toddlers. They seal them in organic oils, so you can basically your kids can play with them all day. And they're selling these things online all over the world, and they make them at Idea Foundry. So we talked about changing the narrative. This slide kind of illustrates how we have done that. We just conjured this artistic idea one day, and there's an audacity to it that people really appreciate. We get jokes constantly. Well, a few years ago it would be, I'll come to your art show, and as soon as I get my Kevlar vest from Amazon, things like that. And you don't hear that stuff anymore.
No.
People come to the art show and they buy art. Is what they do now. But it's just a good story. And so we've appeared in all these different things, including the Atlantic Monthly, which I don't know is in here. Oh yeah, it is in here. I like this quote at the bottom on the left. Barely a handful of places to eat without apology or explanation. Franklinton has a restaurant week. There's nobody out there to tell us we can't do it, so we do it. It doesn't cost anything. And then this is the Atlantic story. We were blown away when the Atlantic magazine called us up last year and said, we want to come out and interview you. We didn't know what the story was going to be about. Nobody did. They rolled into town and they asked the mayor and they asked the Columbus Partnership, what's an interesting story going on in Columbus? Can you give us an example? And we had been talking with the mayor and the partnership about the Columbus Idea Foundry and other potential investments out here. And so they sent the reporter our way, and he spent about 3 hours running around the neighborhood with us. And we went to the foundry. We went to 400 West Rich, which is our big arts facility. I should mention is 110,000 square feet. 110,000 square feet with 100 art studios and 150 artists working there. So they wrote that story about us. This is a meeting with the Columbus Partnership, all the top CEOs in Central Ohio are part of that. OSU has started a new, essentially an institute over at 400 Rich in one of the warehouses because they wanted to be around the creative vibe of the neighborhood. We now have a microbrewery in the neighborhood. It's a really great place to hang out, really nice, great people. This is some of the different groups that have arrived on the scene since we've started this whole arts creative community thing. And they're growing west. They're starting to move into buildings closer and closer to the freeway. Ultimately, I think in the next few years, we'll see them leap the freeway. And so this thing we're growing is going to, I think, expand and get into the part of the neighborhood and really help us sell houses and help us do more affordable housing for the people in the neighborhood. This just kind of breaks everything down a little bit. I'm rushing because I think we're out of time. And here's just a cute little collage of all the fun stuff that's going on in the neighborhood that we've helped drive. Again, this is it's about having positive energy, restoring hope, and encouraging people to come back to a historic neighborhood that has a lot of character, a lot to offer, but has just been so down for so long. It needs a sustained effort. It needs people rallying behind it and believing in it. So with that, Pearl, I think Bruce and I have filled your time. We're ready to answer questions.
All right, well, we do have a few moments for questions, so if anybody has any questions, please type them into the question box now. We'll give a few moments.
So Bruce.
One thing I want to say about Franklinton, you know, it's the people who live here are a different breed. The people here are more, they're making forward with very much pride. They're very proud of Franklinton and of themselves.
The first question I see here is the neighborhood National Register listed? The answer is no. That's come up a few times. I mean, we were just now on the scene of where people are happy and positive and willing to listen to new ideas. It's been broached before, but there's a perception that once you're on the register, somebody's going to tell you what you can do with your house, and people in the neighborhood don't want to hear that.
No.
They want to be able to do exactly what they want with their property whenever they want. So
sometimes that's good and bad, but
There was a meeting recently at the area commission where Jeff Siegler from Main Street Program talked a little bit about the benefits of doing that, and it did get some traction. So I think there is interest. We may be able to see that happen in the next few years. I think that would be actually a very good thing for us to look into. Next question. How do you get others to believe? Well, the question is, how do we get others to believe and invest in the new narrative? The arts and the creativity and the positivity has worked out really well. And frankly, this is real estate development at the end of the day. And people will invest in ways that'll make them money. And we are seeing a lot of people that have the vision, that share our vision, that believe they can make an investment that will pay them back for the next several years. And frankly, I think there's a real vibe out there in the world right now where younger people, generally, 35 and younger, want to be part of something positive that actually gives back and protects the planet, protects the city, protects those who can't protect themselves. And they look for initiatives to do this. For instance, we have Franklinton Gardens in the neighborhood, which is run by a core group of people with an excellent board, but they have volunteer. They have about 20, 25 volunteers that cycle through, and these are people that just want to do some good out there in their own city, and they see if Franklinton is a good place to do that. And we're all just kind of having fun doing it too. It's attractive. It's a good time. We have a lot of cool events. This weekend will be the Independence Day Festival, which is going to be enormous, with bands and all kinds of fun stuff. So it's not hard to get people interested once you sort of become the cool arts district, because it is just more fun. It's not that hard to get them to invest after that point, I think. Although we're not quite there yet. Next question. What incentive or action seemed to make the most impact spurring development? Well, it has been a sustained effort in the press and out there demonstrating that somebody cares.
And someone's doing something. I think that's the big thing. I see people trying to move forward, I think, and that brings people who have money would like to invest in something that's moving forward.
Yeah, it's not, I wouldn't call it a movement exactly, but it does feel that way sometimes.
It's great, you know.
But the action, I think, is just being positive and being open and having this, I won't say Wild West kind of feel to the place, but there's a perception. You see it happening with, especially with the artists who live down here now, that this is a place where people can come and try things that they might not be able to try other places.
It's open dialogue. People really talk to each other. You know, really talk about it.
Yeah.
And we don't try to put on airs.
No. Yeah. All right, selecting questions now. Let's see here. I only like questions that are about me. Has there been a decrease in crime with the renovations of these homes and addition of bars, restaurants? Any stats? There has been a decrease in crime, a significant decrease in crime on this side of the freeway. And frankly, unfortunately, that is due to Riverside Bradley housing complex being decommissioned and torn down. There is, if you look at the crime stats now, for everything east of 315, there's like 1 or 2 crimes reported. There's just nothing that doesn't happen here.
It's just.
Hi, Kyle. Good. How are you doing?
The Franklin itself, is crime, and in most of the cases, it's nuisance crimes. I mean, to say you don't have people, hold-ups,
That's good.
That's rare. Things like break-ins, stink stuff like that happens, and prostitution. It's just something that's a daily battle.
Unfortunately,
but it's going down.
Yeah, unfortunately, we do see a lot of prostitution.